Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on the development and use of innovative technology and practices to enhance the culture of preparedness. Before I recognize myself for an opening statement, I'd like to welcome the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, to the committee. Welcome, Ms. Lesko. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to welcome our witnesses here today to discuss an issue that is important to our homeland security, fostering a culture of preparedness. The events of 2017 emphasize the importance of being prepared for the range of threats that we face. In 6 months alone, there were 3 devastating hurricanes, some of the costliest wildfires that moved through California, and 2 separate ISIS-inspired terror attacks carried out in my hometown of New York City. As the 2018 hurricane season has begun, recovery from last hurricane season is ongoing, and for so many Americans, it will be a long road to pre-storm restoration. I speak from experience to this point. Nearly 6 years later, I still have constituents grappling with the lasting effects of Superstorm Sandy. All of these events underscore the need to foster a culture of preparedness where citizens and government work together to mitigate the impact of future threats. We must work together at all levels of government and with the private sector and the public to identify new and innovative practices and technology that will enhance our prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery capabilities. We need to continually reevaluate the policies and practices we use to respond and rebuild in the wake of a disaster. Investments in mitigation need to be made to create stronger, more resilient systems in a cost-effective manner. Local communities have to be empowered to manage their own basic needs and allow neighborhoods to come together to lend a helping hand. And we need to ensure our first responders have the tools and cutting-edge technology that will enable them to get their vital jobs done. Whether stopping terrorists or preparing for the next natural disaster, American ingenuity should be nurtured to find creative solutions to ready our communities for the next threat. That is why I am pleased to have our witnesses here today to discuss how they are thinking outside of the box as they work to address the threats that we face. I am particularly looking forward to hearing how FEMA is using lessons learned from the 2017 disasters to enhance our ability, working with our state and local partners to respond to hurricane season. I am also interested in learning more about how the Science and Technology Directorate is supporting FEMA in its efforts and working to enhance first responder technology. Finally, central to any successful response effort, it is the ability of our first responders to communicate. And I look forward to hearing about NIST's efforts to enhance first responder communications. With that, I welcome our witnesses here today, and I look forward to our discussion. I am going to allow Mr. Payne, when he arrives, to give his opening statement, but in the meantime, I now would like to introduce our panel of witnesses. I thank you all for being here to discuss this very important topic. Dr. Daniel Kanowski currently serves as the Deputy Administrator for Resilience at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Thank you for coming today, sir. Mr. Dan Cotter is the Director of the Science and Technology Directorate's First Responders Group at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome, sir. Mr. Derek Orr is the Chief of the National Institute of Standards and Technology's Public Safety Communications Division. Welcome. And Mr. John Kelly is the Senior Official performing the duties of the Inspector General at the Department of Homeland Security. I welcome you, sir. The witnesses' full written statements will appear in the record. The Chair now recognizes Administrator Kanowski for 5 minutes of his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Dan Kanowski, and I'm here to testify about how FEMA is using innovative technology and practices to enhance the culture of preparedness. Now, as many of you know, 2017 was a busy hurricane and wildfire season. I was awaiting congressional confirmation as I watched Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and other disasters around this country happen in front of my eyes. Now, I was on the sidelines. I was watching this on TV, and I was afraid I would miss hurricane season. Now, as it turns out, my fears were unfounded, and I became FEMA's acting deputy administrator the day Maria made landfall. Consider the following about last year's historic disaster season. Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria caused a combined $265 billion in damage. Each of these hurricanes was among the top 5 costliest hurricanes on record. In response, FEMA coordinated large deployments of federal personnel, both before and after the storm's landfall, to support response and initial recovery across 270,000 square miles. FEMA facilitated logistics missions that involved more than $2 billion worth of commodities, moving across several states and territories using multiple modes of transportation. In total, hurricanes and the California wildfires affected more than 47 million people, which is 15% of the U.S. population. FEMA registered nearly 4.8 million households for assistance. That's more survivors registered than hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Wilma, and Sandy combined. Now, we recently released our findings from our comprehensive review of our response to last year's hurricanes. It's the 2017 Hurricane Season FEMA After Action Report, or AAR, which is available on FEMA.gov. It's a standard procedure post-disaster. The AAR is not meant to place or skirt blame. It is intended to identify what went right and what can be improved before the next disaster strikes. AARs are part of our DNA in emergency management. Thousands of emergency managers see the value in learning from ourselves and each other. Our lessons learned are driving targeted improvements across the agency and directly informed our 5-year strategic plan. Today, given the focus of the hearing is a culture of preparedness, I'll highlight Goal 1 in that strategic plan, which is fostering a culture of preparedness. First, we need to acknowledge that during a disaster, individuals in the impacted communities are the first responders. There'll never be enough first responders, emergency managers, or service providers to meet the needs of the entire community impacted by the disaster event. The innovation that we need to make is to change the culture of our nation to one of preparedness. We need to empower individuals with the skills and information they need to help speed the response and recovery efforts. Toolkits to help build individual preparedness are available at ready.gov. As discussed more in detail in my written testimony, FEMA is involved in a number of innovative technologies to enhance our ability to help people before, during, and after disasters. Crowdsourcing is not new, but FEMA leveraged this capability from volunteer networks to enhance situational awareness during the 2017 disasters. Immersed is a virtual reality tool created by FEMA that allows users to assess the benefits of mitigating against flood hazards. The Flood Apex program is a program at DHS Science and Technology Directorate and supports FEMA and communities to better understand the breadth and severity of flood events. Of course, not all innovations are technological in nature. At FEMA, we are continually examining ways in which we do business and find more effective and efficient ways to accomplish the goals of our strategic plan. To ensure our agency is best aligned with our strategic priorities, for example, we recently announced the formation of a new organization called FEMA Resilience, which is an organization I am proud to lead. We are also finding better and smarter ways of doing business in the field that have a more direct impact on survivors. For example, we're streamlining our inspections process to damaged homes so that fewer people need to knock on a survivor's door to validate damages sustained in a disaster. And as we utilize authorities granted by Congress, FEMA continues to engage reinsurance markets as one tool to help strengthen the financial framework of the National Flood Insurance Program. FEMA secured $1.46 billion in reinsurance coverage from 28 reinsurers to cover qualifying NFI flood losses in fiscal year 2018. To complement that coverage, FEMA is exploring additional reinsurance placement through a transaction that would, for the first time, engage the capital markets. Finally, as tomorrow is the 28th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I would like to highlight a few things that we're doing at FEMA to align with access and functional needs. We are empowering all of FEMA employees through the development of training so that every single FEMA employee is able to integrate serving people with disabilities into the work we do every day. We are also encouraging our state and local partners to improve accessibility in their communities for people with disabilities by utilizing mitigation funds to build back stronger utilizing universal design. Building so everybody can access and utilize community facilities. That improves a community's resilience. Now, there are many efforts going underway right now at FEMA, and we continue to move forward with those with our dedicated workforce, our partners, our stakeholders to innovate and improve the way we help people before, during, and after disasters. Congress and this committee are key partners in all of this, and we appreciate your support and ask for your continued partnership. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes Mr. Carter for 5 minutes.
Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to speak today. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate's work in using innovative technology to enhance the culture of preparedness. And Chairman Donovan, I'd like to also take this opportunity to again thank you for your visit to New Steel in New York City last August. Both our staff and the many local first responders there really appreciate the opportunity to show you the innovative work they've been doing. It's been a real lasting boost to both our staff's morale and the first responders in the community. So thank you for that, sir. I've been the director of the First Responders Group at FRG for the last 3 years, and I have over 30 years of experience working on programs related to preparedness. Science and technology partners with agencies at all levels of government by developing requirements, conducting technology scouting, leveraging existing investments, developing innovative technologies, testing and evaluating technologies, transitioning and commercializing technologies, but most importantly, integrating these technologies into regular use. For example, the Flood Apex Research Program was initiated at the direct request of the FEMA administrator. And we have partnered on research related to public safety communication for nearly 15 years with the Public Safety Communications Research Laboratory of the National Institute of Standards, represented by Derek Orr here today with us. I'd like to use my time to highlight several examples of our work on behalf of FEMA and the public safety community for my written testimony. Providing advanced personal protective equipment for first responders is one of our key research areas. In the past, we have developed lightweight wildland firefighting gear with over 17,000 units in use at this time. We recently developed new firefighter gloves that provide high levels of burn and puncture protection and far greater dexterity. Over 2,300 pairs of these gloves have been sold to date. One of our latest products to come on the market is improved turnout gear for firefighters. In essence, this is their work suit. This is what they wear when they go to work in a fire. The new gear we have developed is specifically designed to reduce the exposure of firefighters to cancer-causing particulate matter. We've achieved this by adding no-mix lighter interfaces around things like the wrists to prevent the cancer-causing particulate matters from reaching the skin of our firefighters. Another example is RICA, the Radio Internet Protocol Communications Module. This $800 device provides an alternative for public safety organizations to spending $15,000 or more to upgrade their legacy radio systems. We've sold, or our commercial partners sold, over 450 of these units. That's a cost avoidance benefit to public safety of about $6.5 million. Finally, I'd like to highlight our low-cost flood sensors. Today, we rely heavily on highly capable hydrologic and meteorologic monitoring stations for flood warnings. However, these stations may cost as much as $50,000 or more. The sensors we're developing will cost under $1,000. This will enable communities to economically densify flood detection networks, extending the abilities of communities to detect rising water beyond what is currently possible. This will allow for improved local flood warnings, leading to fewer deaths, injuries, and damages. My written statement for the committee includes additional work examples, including our collaboration with FEMA and with PSCR. We in S&T work to support and improve at all levels of government first responder safety and effectiveness to mitigate the impacts of natural disasters. It will also support other missions outlined in my written statement by developing innovative tools to enhance mission performance and preparedness. Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, distinguished members, thank you again for your attention to this important mission and for the opportunity to discuss our work with you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Orr, the chair recognizes you for 5 minutes, and isn't it difficult to speak after somebody who brought toys with them?
I feel a little bit underprepared, but
That's all right. We'll take
get
it
over
into
it.
consideration. Thank you.
Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee, I am Derek Ward, Division Chief of the Public Safety Communications Research Program, the PSCR, at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify about innovations in the field of emergency communications. PSCR's mission is to research and develop critical technologies, features identified by public safety entities so that these practitioners will soon have access to smarter and more effective life-saving technology. PSCR works closely with public safety, government, and industry stakeholders through workshops and summits to publish R&D roadmaps and leverages those roadmaps to develop targeted strategies and program plans. We also work closely with our federal partners, including FirstNet and DHS's Science and Technology Directorate and the Office of Emergency Communications, to ensure effective coordination mechanisms are in place to support our shared public safety mission. Our nation's first responders deal with emergencies every day, and whether it's a routine traffic stop, a multi-alarm fire, or a large-scale event such as the hurricanes of last summer or the attacks at 9/11, the ability of first responders to communicate with each other on scene as well as through incident command remains one of the most critical determinants of emergency response success. At PSCR, we believe that innovative technologies can help, and we are working to accelerate their arrival. First, we conduct internal research at our laboratories across 5 key public safety technology areas. 1, ensuring voice interoperability between current land mobile radio and new broadband devices for the period of time that these 2 technologies coexist. 2, making mission-critical voice communications possible on new broadband devices. 3, advancing location-based services for personnel and assets, especially inside of buildings. 4, researching advanced user interfaces for their abilities to access and transmit complex information. And 5, promoting analytics tools that will help public safety make use of large amounts of data becoming available. Some of our most recent lab projects include using state-of-the-art laser technology to quickly and easily map and develop 3-dimensional models of buildings for the creation of enhanced maps and location tracking for first responders, a virtual reality test environment to measure the impact of future user interfaces on public safety operations, mission-critical voice measurement methods, which will allow public safety and industry to compare land mobile radio with broadband so as to determine when and if transition to broadband is possible for mission-critical voice communications, and small self-contained network-in-a-box prototypes, which responders could rapidly deploy using drones to establish communications anywhere. Putting this technology in the hands of public safety personnel would help them assess emergency scenarios safely and smartly before sending in boots on the ground. It would help them reduce the harm to citizens and property, and it would help them avoid unnecessary injury or even death. PSCR not only conducts internal research, but also puts substantial resources into promoting the development of these technologies externally through grants, cooperative agreements, and open innovation prize challenges. These efforts give NIST access to experts and innovators from around the world and greatly expand the number of researchers focused on key public safety communications issues. To date, we have provided over $40 million in grants and cooperative agreements to nearly 40 recipients, and more funding opportunities are on the way. Additionally, in 2018, PSCR launched and completed its first 2 technology-based prize challenges with total prize amounts of roughly $400,000. These challenges were focused on the use of drones for expanding network coverage and on using virtual reality to develop effective in-building navigation interfaces for future heads-up displays. Through these challenges, we have engaged with innovators from all walks of life and seen companies and partnerships form. I firmly believe that encouraging these open partnerships between public safety, private industry, and academic institutions is strengthening the pace of and passion for delivering tangible solutions. Never before have there been so many people focused on communications technology R&D beneficial to our first responders. In closing, I'd like to highlight the PSCR tagline, "Pulling the Future Forward." We are committed to reducing the time by which public safety will access these key technologies by accelerating the pace of research in the areas and expanding the number of research focused on the mission. By establishing measurement methods, enlisting new research recruits, and developing proof-of-concept technologies, all with traceable links to public safety, we will transform the future of emergency response, making the best possible use of time, talents, and resources. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kelly for 5 minutes.
Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. My testimony focuses on Office of Inspector General audits, assessing the efficiency and effectiveness of FEMA's information technology activities that support its multiple missions. Numerous OIG audits conducted since 2005 disclosed that FEMA maintains outdated IT systems and infrastructure. This hinders FEMA's ability to effectively carry out disaster response and recovery efforts. The long-standing deficiencies hamper FEMA's ability to effectively integrate internal systems to perform end-to-end mission functions, track and manage disaster-related funds, and share information with external emergency management partners. These deficiencies limit real-time coordination across disasters efforts. As shown in 2017 and in many other years, FEMA regularly responds to multiple major disasters. As such, effective IT systems are essential for FEMA to successfully execute its mission. We attribute FEMA's IT deficiencies to ineffective IT management practices. FEMA lacks 4 key elements to carry out its mission. First, it lacks centralized planning, development, and management of agency-wide IT resources. Second, a comprehensive IT strategic plan with clearly defined goals and objectives that guide program office initiatives. Third, an approach to modernize its IT infrastructure and systems. And finally, a comprehensive understanding of existing IT resources and needs throughout FEMA. In addition, FEMA's Chief Information Officer lacks centralized budget authority to provide guidance and oversight and establish a formal governance process that guides agency-wide IT decisions. Despite the importance of IT resources to FEMA's mission, our audits repeatedly identify problems with IT systems and infrastructure. After the 4 hurricanes devastated Florida in 2004, and after Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma devastated the Gulf Coast in 2005, we reported that FEMA encountered challenges supporting response and recovery operations, establishing a strategic IT direction for system modernization, and improving its logistic information systems. More recently, in 2011 and 2015, we reported that FEMA's outdated mission-critical IT systems still could not fully support emergency mission operations. Our reports reiterated that a lack of integration among FEMA's IT systems hindered FEMA's from successfully executing essential functions such as logistics management, financial management, and grant management. To address the IT system and management issues identified in our 2011 and 2015 audits, we made a number of recommendations. However, this past February, we issued a management alert pointing out that FEMA had made limited progress improving its IT management and has not taken steps to adequately address our recommendations. Many of the issues we identified in our reports, even those disclosed in our mid-2000 reports, remain unchanged and adversely impact day-to-day operations and mission readiness. The management alert highlighted that due to competing priorities, FEMA's CIO removed funding and staff resources needed to effectively address our recommendations. Given the importance of IT resources to FEMA successfully executing its mission, that decision was short-sighted. In May, we initiated a comprehensive audit regarding FEMA's IT management approach. We expect to issue that report in early 2019. In summary, IT systems play a vital role in supporting FEMA's response and recovery efforts. Slow progress in addressing long-standing IT issues hampers disaster response efforts and results in wasted money. Having reliable and efficient IT systems and infrastructure is critical to support disasters, especially given that Congress appropriates, on average, more than $10 billion a year for FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund. To be good stewards of tax dollars, FEMA needs strong IT leadership direction to finally overcome its IT management. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I'll be happy to answer questions from you or other members of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for any opening statement that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence and welcome and the witnesses. And, as usual, I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing to address the technology and innovation in disaster preparedness. Damage from the 27 disasters broke records and made last year the costliest year of disaster-related damage in American history. I hope to hear from, well, I did hear from the witnesses, and maybe I didn't, about how you are taking the lessons learned from the 2017 hurricane season and investing in technologies that will be pushed out to communities. Now more than ever, communities are facing mounting threats from extreme weather patterns. We are seeing where climate change is having a direct impact on the strength and frequency of storms. As such, we must all take measures to ensure that life-saving preparedness technologies are developed and pushed out to the federal, state, and local leaders. For these reasons, I am dismayed that the FEMA 2018-2022 strategic plan failed to mention climate change, and given the record-breaking year we saw for natural disasters. Additionally, I was disappointed when FEMA's 2017 hurricane season after action report failed to mention climate change, when we saw Hurricane Harvey produce a historic 60 inches in rainfall, and back-to-back hurricanes Irma and Maria devastated the Caribbean. I hope to hear from the witnesses today about how you are using climate change research to push for advances in preparedness technologies. It is not good to have conversations about technologies here in Washington, D.C., when people on the ground do not have access to those technologies. FEMA noted many of their shortcomings in response to Hurricane Maria in the 2017 hurricane season after action report. One such shortcoming that needs to be addressed today is how to get these technologies to the people that need them the most. That way, well before a Category 4 or 5 storm hits communities, they will have been made aware of the helpful preparedness technologies that are available and that we discuss here in Washington, D.C. I'm particularly interested in hearing from Deputy Inspector General Kelly about past audits in FEMA's technologies that the Office of Inspector General has performed throughout the years. I would like to thank the witnesses for participating in today's hearing, and I was glad to hear their opening statements, and look to hear from all of you about the progress that has been made with technologies and preparedness. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. I'd first like to address the after-action report that you were talking about, and knowing that we're talking here about technology and preparedness, the purpose of the, what were some of the findings that you think that were needed or could be needed in the future after analyzing what's happened in the 17 season? Is there technology to help us prepare better? Is there something that Congress needs to do to help you, to help our nation to be prepared better for the upcoming seasons and the seasons going forward? And I'd also like to ask you as a second question about artificial intelligence and the use of technology and artificial intelligence. I know some of the mapping and modelings may have been deficient in the past, and now with new innovative ways of us predicting and preparing, is any of that technology useful to you in your efforts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, as was referenced, we did learn a lot of lessons from the 2017 hurricane season. The 50-page after-action report is a very blunt self-assessment about what some of the things we did right and some of the things that we need to improve in the future. And as I mentioned before, we think in the emergency management world, it's very important to be transparent about those lessons. So I'm happy to hit a couple of those lessons specifically for you. Logistics. Logistics bedeviled us, both in the early, the immediate aftermath by getting commodities, supplies, and equipment, particularly to Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands during Hurricane Maria. Shipping everything by sea and by air was a huge challenge. It wasn't something that FEMA had faced before. Normally, we can truck in supplies, even across state lines. It's not a problem. But the logistics network and the supply chains associated with that, not just at FEMA and not just emergency management agencies, but the private sector. And that's to get to my second point, which is critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure sectors are absolutely essential to provide those services that you and I need as Americans, that disaster survivors need as Americans in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. Those supply chains, those logistics, and the ability for those private sector companies to get the power back on, or water, or the hospitals back online, a lot of those responsibilities fall within the private sector. And we at FEMA acknowledge now that we need to be more supportive of the private sector, one, and two, more integrated with. And then three, let me mention staffing. I think I'm quoting Administrator Long in one of his previous congressional testimonies where he said, by the time Maria hit, we were tapped out. We simply did not have the amount and number of personnel necessary to effectively respond to three concurrent, catastrophic, complex catastrophes. That's a lot of C's. But it was something like we had not seen before. But in the future, we realized we do need to be prepared for these things. So on staffing, we made great use of the DHS surge capacity force for the first time, where we leveraged thousands of personnel, not only from DHS, but throughout the entire federal government. I think moving forward, we could leverage technology for that, is to get the word out quickly about what specifically we need, what type of critical skills we could use. In the case of Maria, we needed bilingual staff. So if you were a Spanish speaker, we wanted you, but it might have been hard to reach those particular individuals throughout the entire federal government, other than doing what you can imagine we did, which is send out emails saying, if you speak Spanish and if you want to serve your country and deploy to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, we want you. We want you to help us. Ironically, I'm going to one last mention. Ironically, technology was a hindrance for us in Puerto Rico. Because remember, without power and communications, we couldn't use our traditional method of registering disaster survivors for aid with an iPad or other electronic devices, a computer. We had to go back the old way. We had to get paper out of the storerooms and put them on clipboards and deploy volunteers and members of the surge capacity force to go door to door to register people for aid with pen and paper. That, ironically as it sounds, was an innovation, going back to paper, because we did not have a functioning communication system that would enable us to connect to the internet in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands.
I only have a few moments left. Just for some of our colleagues, Don and I come from the Northeast. He from New Jersey, me from New York, so we don't experience things like tornadoes that are less predictable. Hurricanes we see days in advance. We don't know what path they're going to take, but we kind of know where the hurricane territories are. So knowing that, and I visited Puerto Rico 2 weeks after the storm and then 3 months after the devastation, saw the remarkable recovery, but it's going to take a long time, but saw the remarkable devastation 2 weeks after the storm had hit. Knowing that Spanish-speaking communities are in this pathway, again, knowing that places with poor infrastructure, my understanding is a lot of the infrastructure in places like Puerto Rico were built in the 1950s. Since we're talking about preparedness, are we taking any measures to be prepared for the 18 season, the 19 season, the 20 season? And again, my question will be to all of you, because I think with three of us, we could probably ask a second round of questions, is what can we do? We are lawmakers. You are the boots on the ground. We need to assist you. What is it that Congress could do to help you make your job more efficient, more effective?
Well, Mr. Chairman, first on preparedness, I was so glad to see the title of this hearing was Build a Culture of Preparedness. I mean, the fact that that aligns with our goal number one of our strategic plan shows our shared interest in this issue. I think now is the right time to have a conversation with the American public to say, listen, FEMA's not a first responder. FEMA cannot be there in the minutes, hours, and sometimes days following a disaster. We're asking you, the American public, to take responsibility and be prepared. Be prepared now in the traditional ways that we've talked about for many years. Listen, ready.gov and other ready initiatives have been around since DHS's inception. It was a result of 9/11, where we said citizen preparedness is important. But what we feel at FEMA is we need to take this a step further. One, we have to have open and honest conversations about this, that FEMA is not a first responder, that you need to be prepared. But at the same time, we can't scare the American public and just tell the American public you need to be prepared without providing specific guidance. So if you go to ready.gov, you'll see particular protective action guidance for a number of different scenarios. And ask these kind of questions, and I often do this in my public speaking engagements, is to ask the audience, how many know CPR? Or how many know how to shut off the water or gas to your home? How many know to check on your neighbor, especially those neighbors that have special needs? And very few hands go up. Now, second, something might sound kind of strange coming from someone at FEMA, but we as Americans need to be better financially prepared. Did you know that 44% of Americans can't put their hands on $400 that they might need in an emergency? 44%, nearly half of Americans don't have that much cash on hand. Well, we need to make sure that Americans are financially prepared, and that includes insurance. And of course, I have a self-interest here on flood insurance. I think every home should have flood insurance because every home can flood. Do not pay attention to the line about the 1 in 100-year floodplain. Do not pay attention to frankly, to those that advise you don't need flood insurance because you're outside. And we're partnering with non-traditional audiences like the realtors to say, we need you to tell your clients that just because they're not in a flood zone doesn't mean they don't need flood insurance. It shouldn't be, oh, don't worry, new homeowner. You're going to save some money each month because you don't have to have flood insurance. You're not required to have that by law. The conversation should be, any home can flood. And again, some self-interest here, floodsmart.gov, which, by the way, was recently updated, and a great example of how FEMA is embracing technology. If you haven't seen floodsmart.gov recently, I encourage you to do so. But the best time to buy is when it's dry. It takes 30 days for a policy to take effect. I hope every American knows that they need insurance. And it's not just flood insurance, by the way. Many Americans are sorely underinsured. As your family grows, as you add new furniture or even an addition on your home, make sure that your insurance is keeping up with your life. Because if you're underinsured and you lose everything, you're going to have a very, very hard time recovering.
Thank you, sir. And I remember when New York City, after the 2003 blackout, started civilian emergency response teams, teaching civilians to do things that were not dangerous, but so we didn't have to use first responders to direct traffic and things like that. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I think you made some very good points with respect to FEMA not being a first responder, but, and in anticipation of your resources being needed, I think there were a lot of areas where you could have done better. And knowing that this situation and circumstance was around the corner, I don't understand, how in some areas we plan for the worst, and then other areas we just kind of, well, we know something's coming, but we didn't expect it to be that big. I mean, I would think in these circumstances you try to plan for the worst. I think that, almost every instance should be looked at as a category 4 or 5, and then you ramp down as you don't need as much resource. So that would just be something I'd point out. One of the points that really stuck in my mind was when, after, the circumstance, we were in the middle of it, and you know, there just happened to be an article that former Secretary Clinton was quoted on, and she said, well, you know, I would have had the, you know, the ship Hope ready. And then that's when, you know, the government got involved and got the ship ready, which took another 2 weeks to get ready and ramp up. But why wouldn't you have that within 2 or 3 days of being ready, circumstance? So, you know, Secretary Clinton, you know, she's retired now, but she just mentions it in an article, and then was the impetus of it being used. But that's for another day. Let's see, Administrator Kanowski, you know, in the 2017 Hurricane Season After Action Report, FEMA indicated it did not properly take into account the factors that would make it difficult for Puerto Rico to withstand a major hurricane. FEMA also admitted that it did not anticipate the logistics demands, as you stated, associated with the response activities on the island. Now that FEMA has identified these shortcomings, do you believe the agency has the tools necessary to respond appropriately should a similar disaster strike Puerto Rico? And let me just say, I give a lot of credit for you admitting, you know, where some of the shortcomings were. A lot of times you don't get that part of it, so I'll commend you on that a bit. So, would you respond, please?
Thank you, Ranking Member. And yes, much of what you mentioned aligns directly with Goal 2 in our strategic plan, which is enhancing the nation's catastrophic readiness. So just as the same that Goal 1 said individuals need to be prepared and FEMA needs to be prepared to assist, Goal 2 says FEMA's role should really be, in our view, focused on catastrophic events. And we estimate that probably 80% of events could be best managed at the state level. And what we call federally supported, state-managed, locally executed disasters could be the new norm going forward for potentially up to 80% of disasters. Now, all of those would still be funded by FEMA and by the federal government, but we believe that the state is best positioned to manage their own response and recovery, and for FEMA to fill in the gaps in those responses and to play a much larger role in those 20% of truly catastrophic disasters, just like Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and the California wildfires. I think what many people also forget is that last year, prior to Hurricane Maria, FEMA had not only Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, but we had 30 other disasters, even prior to Hurricanes Harvey, where FEMA personnel were deployed all around the United States. The lesson we learned, of course, is that created huge staffing challenges for us when the really big one hit with Hurricane Maria. So we had to reallocate staff and resources from all over the country, including from Texas and in Florida, to Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. That was a huge challenge. So going forward, what we're doing is making sure that, one, we have more pre-positioned personnel and assets. And frankly, as a result of the busy hurricane season we had and the open recovery effort, the ongoing recovery efforts in those 4 areas, we now have personnel pre-positioned there for this hurricane season. So personnel are there. Thousands of FEMA personnel are pre-positioned in those likely hurricane-prone areas. We've also pre-deployed far more commodities this year. And the way we did that was we increased the level of contracts that we had and deployed. Again, in Puerto Rico alone, we have 7 times the amount of commodities there today than we did before Maria hit. Now, that's not because we ran out of commodities last year. It's because we could run out in the future if something even worse were to hit. So we need, to your point, to not just plan for a bad day, but a really bad day. Today, I'm confident that because of our updated plans and procedures and because of the additional personnel and commodities and equipment that's pre-deployed to those likely hurricane-prone areas, that we're better prepared. And finally, I'll say that we exercise those plans. So just this spring, And for national level exercise 2018, we simulated a hurricane striking the mid-Atlantic. And to your point, it was a Category 4 hurricane. It gave us the opportunity to test many of those plans and procedures, some of which are brand new, some of which now engage the private sector in a way that we hadn't before. And we did that in an exercise so that now we can be better prepared for a real-world event for the hurricane season this year.
Okay, thank you. I've gone way over my time, so I will yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have 5 minutes, and I have 3 questions, so hopefully we can answer all 3. The first question is actually addressing Mr. Kelly's comments, and the question is actually for Mr. Kanuski. I'd like you to respond to his assessment that the IT infrastructure in FEMA is outdated and needs to be fixed, and what's your response?
Well, first of all, many of those IG reports that were mentioned, FEMA concurred with. And we've embraced those findings and are doing our best to implement them. I will also note that, as the Inspector General noted, these are problems that have existed since at least 2005, and so we can't fix them overnight, but we are putting personnel and resources towards fixing them. We've taken some immediate actions. We've changed our leadership in CIO. I think that sends a strong signal that we are doing things differently now. And we are focusing, like I said, our time of the leadership team, as well as personnel and resources on fixing some of those challenges.
Thank you. Do you have a timeline on what you're doing? Or actually, since we don't have time, if you could just email it maybe to the committee, and then they can email it to me. My next question actually has to do with, since I'm from Arizona, we have wildfires. In fact, I think it was about 5 years ago, the Yarnell Hill Fire killed 19 Prescott hotshot firefighters. And I was wondering what, this is to any of you, how do you work with states like Arizona to help mitigate these wildfires?
I'll go first with one quick answer, which is, first of all, I'm a former firefighter paramedic, and I understand the devastation that can be caused by wildfires. But yes, it's been several busy wildfire seasons, and we at FEMA realized that we need to do more than just respond to wildfires. A recent innovation is that for our fire management assistance grants, those grants that we give out quite regularly to those areas hardest hit by wildfires, that pays for response to those wildfires, reimburses state and local governments for their responses. We are now adding a mitigation component. In fact, we have added a mitigation component. So for each of those fire management assistance grants, we're not just reimbursing for the cost of the response, we're helping to make an investment in those local communities to lessen the impact of future wildfires.
I might add that we're working with the state of California in particular on software that will allow all the people involved in the firefighter community to understand the situation in real time. In particular, if a fire line's breached, that people know to rally back and what point to. It may be that using land mobile radios and the communication voice may not be clear, and instant communication using a software package to assist. And maybe leave it to my colleague from PSCR to talk about the deployable comms piece of that, which could have been very important in Yarnell.
Certainly, thank you. Our laboratory is in Colorado, and obviously we're dealing with several very large fires right now as well. And so that's a very important topic for us. All the areas that I listed, whether it be analytics, enhanced user interfaces like heads-up displays, mission-critical voice over broadband, or location-based services, every single one of those areas would be useful on the fire ground of a wildland fire. The area that Dan mentioned related to deployables is an area of research we're doing actually on behalf of DHS and Dan's group and S&T, which is focused on the ability to use a self-contained LTE network in a box probably about this big, and it is the entire LTE network, all deployed in a box about that big, and we're looking about taking a look at the ability to deploy that on a drone so that in the middle of a wildland fire where there's no infrastructure and no capability to drive in a truck, you would be able to put up a completely self-contained LTE network with all the mapping, the data transfer, the voice communications, wherever you wanted it, and it would be able to follow you wherever you went. So those kind of applications, I think, would be fantastic to be able to deploy on a fire ground, whether it be in a wildland or in an urban setting.
And from the IG's perspective, we concur with the Deputy Administrator. Hazard mitigation grants, if well managed, can be very effective, and they actually prevent the disaster or the effects of the disaster before that actually occurs. So,
Thank you, thank you. And I think I've run out of time. Do we have time for one more question, Mr. Chair? Okay. Are we? Well, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one last question. I have a constituent who has an idea on communications for law enforcement and for preparedness. And so what's the best way for a entrepreneur person to transfer their information to you? Should they just, I get your cards and tell them to call you, or what's the best way to do this?
Speaking on behalf of FEMA, we have an industry office that does just that, that liaises with industry, including entrepreneurs, for their ideas. We also realize we need to do a better job of engagement. We hope to soon have a private sector portal on our website, so this can be done electronically, and that's something that we're aiming to do very soon.
Similarly, at Science Technology, you have industry engagement liaisons, certainly can provide that information as follow-up. Also, depending on the type of technology he wants to offer, we have open, procurement requests for industry, small businesses to apply to.
So at PSCR, I would encourage somebody to go to our website. We have a newsletter that alerts people to opportunities for funding, whether it's grants or prize challenges. I do think our use of open innovation prize challenges allows us to provide funding to entities and people who might not normally be in the normal grant loop or procurement loop for the federal government. So it does allow for a new way to interact with all kinds of innovators that are out there that have great ideas to help solve these issues.
if those actions don't work, your constituents should submit a hotline complaint to our hotline, because that's some ways of getting things done also.
I like how you think. All right, thank you very much, and I yield back. Well, I took extra time.
That's all right. We'll take it from you in the next round. Mr. Watt, that was an incredible, insightful thing you spoke about, this box on a drone, wildfires. Sounds like something that maybe had been taken advantage of in Puerto Rico when the technology was down too, that you could have this hot box, whatever you call it. Can you describe, in your testimony, you're talking about other awards, one at the University in New York City, Homeland Security Division in New Jersey received some of your awards. Can you tell us about some of the projects that are out there and if there's some kind of time frame on them?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. One, we know we have a lot of work to do in a fairly constrained period of time at PSCR. The funding we were given from the 2012 Act that created FirstNet and also funded our activities from the auction funds provided a timeline on it of 2022. So we have a lot of work to do in a short period of time. And although we're doing a lot of the key measurement science inside of our labs, we also know we need to get as many researchers as possible looking at this from around the country and around the world. So as I said, we've already released over 40 grants and over $40 million to address all the issues I talked about. So we've got grants in mission critical voice, and it's both academia and industry that are part of these. We've got grants in analytics. We've got grants focused on location-based services. We've got grants focused on enhanced user interfaces for the future first responders. So we are addressing all the areas that I've talked about. Most of the grants on average are 2 years because we want to turn around on these grants and have enough time to then iterate and do another 1 or 2 iterations on grants and prize challenges from the results from the first. So most of them are 2 years. Some of them are 3 if they were doing an academic institution and there was a PhD-related researcher that needed 3 years as part of their PhD program. But most are 2 years, but they're covering our entire swath of areas.
Thank you. Mr. Cotter, I did visit New Steel remarkable work that they're doing there. Can you tell me what other needs you may have from Congress besides our vocal support to advance the technology that New Steel is working on?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your support. Really, that's been wonderful. You know, it certainly has enabled us to keep doing what we're doing. I might just like to mention that much of what you've seen and certainly appreciate is our work in the New York City region with local first responders. I also like to stress that New Steel really has a national presence. You know, we've done work in 41 states, 306 cities across the nation. You know, they've trained over 2,000 different first responders around the community. You know, just an amazing amount of work. So just recognizing that they're not just a New York City asset, they're truly a national asset for us.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let's see, Deputy Inspector Kelly. You know, in my review of the FEMA's 2017 hurricane season after action report, I was struck by how many of the findings were problems that we've had and heard of before, as identified by your office. You know, I've been on this subcommittee for 6 years now, 3 terms. I've had 3 different chair people. This has been the best one, who's stayed the longest.
The chair recognizes Mr. Payne for as long as he
But, you know, specifically, you know, I noted that FEMA staffing challenges, coordination with state and locals, and asset visibility were issues your office flagged many years ago. Have you had a chance to review the after action report? And if so, what are some of the issues that continually come up and have yet to be addressed?
Ranking Member, yes, I did have the opportunity to review the after-action report. I thought it was very thorough. And some of the things that you identified there, both staffing issues and logistic problems, are things that we've harped on in the past. In September of 16, we issued a report on FEMA's qualification system, their staffing system. They were supposed to have basically 11,000 reservists or temporary workers to surge for disasters. At the time that we did the audit, they had less than half of those individuals on board. So they had basically a deficiency of half of the people that they thought they needed to respond to disasters. I noticed in the after-action report they showed what appeared to be some progress in increasing the number of staff associated with that program, but they were far below what they needed. And I think in years like 17, it shows the problems with not having the staff on board. Now, in FEMA's defense, there are a number of challenges for them to get the staff that they need, many of which are beyond their controls. When you have a strong economy, it's very difficult to get people to give up their jobs to take on a part-time job. And maybe they need some legislative fixes to help work in that area. Another area on logistics that you addressed, we have found problems with their integrated systems, and the Deputy Administrator emphasized the federally funded, state-managed, and locally executed mantra that FEMA has, which is a very good mantra. We strongly support that. But to have that work effectively, to be good stewards of the tax dollars, FEMA needs to have integrated systems that the state and local communities can tap into. We understand that they have significant problems actually getting information from FEMA because of the firewalls that have been set up. And that poses significant challenges to those who are trying to respond to the disasters.
Okay. Thank you. And, you know, to the point that the Deputy Administrator was making in terms of people being bilingual and all, you know, it would appear to me from the area that we come from, there were people that had a common interest in seeing things happen there with our large Puerto Rican community and Caribbean community in those areas, to even go on local TV to say we need people to volunteer. There are people that had a natural interest in what was happening to family members and what have you, that, you know, a little promotion in that area. People were coming to my office all the time saying, well, how can we help? What can we do? We want to be helpful. And, you know, to know that you were looking for people like that, you know, would be helpful in the onset. You know, to your point about many of the, you know, FEMA's public-facing technologies for preparedness require a certain level of means, tech savviness and literacy. For example, the preparedness information on floodsmart.gov or information being set through the FEMA app, you know, all require a certain level of technology knowledge that not everyone has. How is FEMA's preparedness message reaching populations with limited access to technology? You know, I have some of the most affluent constituents in New Jersey and some of the poorest. So everybody has, as it states, does not have the same means. How do you address that, sir?
Well, thank you. And yes, thank you to the Inspector General for his, what I thought were very insightful and balanced comments about the challenges we face. Just as a overall statement, I'll say that you don't want to look at the AAR in isolation. You want to look at the AAR in tandem with our strategic plan. They really are linked documents. AAR is where we think we can improve, and the strategic plan is where we want to go in the next 5 years. So first, on the issue of staffing, yes, we do face many challenges in recruitment and retention of our disaster reservists. You may not know this, but our reservists are not treated the same way legally as a reservist in the armed forces. They don't have a status that allows them either to become a full-time employee, there's no career path there. Two, if they're to leave work, if there's a disaster and they leave work, there's no protection on them being able to return to their jobs. So there are a number of challenges in addition to what you heard. As far as getting volunteers in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, I agree. We definitely want to leverage the volunteer base. That's generally done through the non-governmental organizations. FEMA can't welcome volunteers on as easily. We have that reservist program, right? And that would take some time to get on board. But in the immediate aftermath, the best thing that someone can do if they want to help in a disaster is go to a non-governmental organization. And if you say, I'm not sure which one to go to or which one is the best based on my interest or my expertise, the answer is NVOED. Now that's an acronym for the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And would you believe today at FEMA headquarters is our Voluntary Partnership Day. So today we're showcasing all of these voluntary organizations we're working with and strengthening those bonds with those organizations so they can bring on volunteers, so they can provide specialized resources. As far as other employees, how we can leverage those with a particular interest, I think we can all agree those that have the most interest in their recovery are the disaster survivors themselves. I'm very proud to say that today, FEMA is one of the largest employers on Puerto Rico. We have, I believe, 1,500 local hires that are managing not only our recovery programs, but managing their recovery for the future. Now, to your point about not everybody having access to technology, I agree. And we know that there will always be a segment of the population that we can't reach via technology. So no matter how much we go on Twitter or how much we post on the website, we have to have relationships on the ground. Now, for FEMA, that might mean our regional offices, and it might mean our joint field offices. So anybody in a disaster site can go to our joint field office and get some one-on-one assistance. But in addition, we're working with the NGO community. And I want to mention one in particular, which is Operation Hope. Operation Hope has an unbelievable mission. They are out there educating people on financial literacy. We've partnered with them. We've developed an emergency financial first aid kit to help those that do not have that financial literacy, help them prepare for disaster, help them prepare for any emergency that they might have. And if you ever want to see an inspiring story, look at John Hope Bryant, the founder of that organization. I'm going to use a plug here for our Prep Talk series. I don't know if anybody has heard of that, but think of it as like a TED Talk for emergency management. Those have been very popular, and John Hope Bryant himself did one of our first Prep Talks, and you can find that online. And I think that message really resonates with me, and it reminds me every day that we need to make sure that we're helping everyone, every American, not just those with access.
Oh, thank you. And I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Ms. Lesko for any questions you may have. You're their favorite member. For not only your testimony and not only your patience with us today, but also for your service to our nation. There's a lack of understanding sometimes of what everyone's role is. Sometimes there's a lack of understanding, not from people on this committee, but other members of Congress, what your role is. So what you've shared with us today is insightful. Know that you have our support. And please, again, no one answered my question, but we are lawmakers. Sometimes we make laws that aren't as effective as the people who need to use them would wish them to be. So this communication that we have doesn't end here today. Let us know how we could help you protect our communities. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. We ask that you respond to those in writing. Pursuant to the committee rule 7D, the hearing record will remain open for 7 days without objection. The subcommittee stands adjourned. You did it, John. Good job.